Well, welcome to Castillo de San Marcos National Monument. My name is Galin Hernandez. Everybody knows me as Galen. I am a volunteer. I am not a ranger. I'm a volunteer here because I am twice retired. I'm retired from the U.S. Air Force, where I was a lieutenant colonel, and I'm retired from the Department Air Force Reserves, actually, and I'm retired from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, where I was a special agent on the border. Because I'm retired twice, that means I don't do anything from Monday to Fridays, and then on Saturdays and Sundays I rest from doing nothing. Except for Wednesdays, when I come here to the fort and I'm part of the living history, historic weapons, and I get to shoot the cannons and fire the muskets. It's a blast. Get it? It's a blast. So, yeah, we're going to be talking. I want to talk to you about the Forts of St. Augustine. You are in the oldest masonry fort in North America, the Castillo de San Marcos. It is 350 years old, the oldest masonry fort anywhere in North America. But it's the 10th fort here. There were 9 others before this fort in this area, within a mile. So, to give you an idea of what we're talking about, 350 is a large number. It's very old. I'm old, but I am not 350. Not yet, so I'll make it. But to give you an idea of what we mean when we say 350, when the Pilgrims arrived to Plymouth Rock on the Mayflower, the first babies that had been born in St. Augustine were already grandparents. The first baby born in St. Augustine, Martinico del Gayes, was born here in 1566. The Mayflower didn't arrive until 1620. He was 54 years old and was living in Merida, Mexico. St. Augustine is the oldest continuously inhabited European colony in North America. But it's the 13th attempt by Europeans to put some kind of colony in North America. First 12 failed. Everybody died. The first time a European made it to North America was Juan Ponce de Leon. I'm sure you heard the legend of the Fountain of Youth. He arrived about 10 miles north of here in a place called Punta Vedra Beach. He arrived there in 1513. You realize that is 107 years before the Mayflower? 107 years before the Mayflower, the Spanish were already here. And because of European law, they owned everything to include Canada. It was Spanish. Obviously, the Native Americans didn't believe they owned anything, but according to European law, the Spanish owned all of North America to include Canada. But to the Spanish, anything north of St. Augustine was worthless. You couldn't defend it even if they wanted to. So when the British and the French coming through the north, you can have it, you can have it, you can have it, till they got to St. Augustine. From this point on, they fought. This is also the only fort in the world that was never defeated in actual battle. The first battle in 1702 lasted 60 days, could not take this fort. Second battle, 1740, lasted 32 days, they could not take this fort. It's the only fort that was never defeated. Now, remember, I said this is the 10th fort here. There were 9 other forts within a mile of here. We're going to talk a little bit about those 9 forts. When Pedro Menendez arrives in this area in the year 1565, he spots this location, this entrance, this bay, on the Catholic Day of St. Augustine. That's why he calls it St. Augustine. So he comes into the bay and wants to establish the colony here. Now, when he gets here, half the ships that came with him didn't make it. About 700 people died. So when he got here, the first thing he did, he had a Catholic Mass. And you see that very, very big cross that's up north? That commemorates the spot where he had that first Catholic Mass. After the Mass, he ordered a feast to give thanks for having crossed the Atlantic safely. And he invited the Native Americans, the Timucuan. They sat down and they had a Thanksgiving feast 55 years before the Mayflower. And they know the exact date. September 8th, 1565. Because it's written down in multiple church and Spanish documents, some of the documents in excruciating detail, exactly what happened. So 55 years before the Mayflower, they had a Thanksgiving here. Now, when Menendez gets here in 1565, the relationship between the Spanish and the Timucuan, the Native Americans here, was a very good, cordial one. The chief of the Timucuan at the time was Chief Seloy. As a gesture of friendship, he gives to Pedro Menendez what he calls a great house. Basically, it's a very, very big hut made out of small branches, small bushes. It was so big that the documents say up to 150 people could fit inside this hut. So it was that big. He gives it to Pedro as a measure, a token of friendship between the Timucuan and the Spanish. Now, Menendez, right after that, has a small moat dug around the house, plants spiny, kind of like a little cactus, spiny plants in it, and takes some of his small swivel guns, really small guns, puts it on he fortifies that hut. So it becomes Fort number 1. It was a great house that the chief of the Timucuan gave to the Spanish as a gesture of friendship. Fort number 1. If you go to the present day Fountain of Youth, you will see an area that's cordoned off, and archaeologists are digging there. That's Fort number 1. And the entire first community is there. They found it where the Fountain of Youth is, and they're actually digging. You can see it cordoned off. They got all kinds of PhDs and doctors doing research there. But after a while, the Timucuan realized these white boys are not going home. They've come here, they're staying, and they're not leaving. We want them to leave our home. So tensions start building between the natives and the Spanish. And it boils down to a point where the Timucuan attack. And in the battle, they burn down Fort number 1. Fort number 1 is burnt. Now Menendez realized that he does not have the strength to defend against the natives, because when you get the Timucuan, the Guade, the Yamasee, Native Americans, they outnumber his forces by a large number. He cannot defend that little spot. So he moves the entire colony across the river to Anastasia Island, right there, right across the water. Because that way, if the natives are going to attack, they have to cross a large body of water. He has plenty of time to get ready and shoot them with his small cannons. It's much easier to defend. So he builds Fort number 2 right on the beach, where he can protect them as they're coming over. But Menendez did not know that the tides here are very high. And soon after Fort number 2 was built, there was a king tide, which is an even higher tide than normal, and it washes away the walls of Fort number 2. Fort number 2 is gone. So he builds Fort number 3 about 150 yards further inland, where the tides can't get to the fort. But by then, it had gotten cold again. When the Spanish were coming over, they were promised gold, silver, riches, land. Now they're here. Half of them are dead. None of the crops that they brought from Europe grow here. It's just clay and sand. They're dying of hunger. They're cold, and they want to go home. So the Spanish mutiny. And in the mutiny, they burn down their own fort. Fort number 3 gets burned down. The mutineers are caught, they're hung, but Menendez realizes, wait a second, St. Augustine, we're actually in a peninsula. We're surrounded by water on 3 sides. We have bridges today, but we don't realize it. But we have water on 3 sides. So he takes the colony and makes it a little further south. It's easier to defend. There's only one way to come in. So he built Fort number 4 a little further south, getting closer to where we are today. He built Fort number 4. Now, this area does not have wood. All the trees you see here were planted in the 1930s to sell the land. The palm trees, they come from India in the Middle East. There's only 2 actual native palm trees from Florida, and they're more of a bamboo than a palm tree. So all these Florida palm trees, they come from the Middle East, from India. There's no wood here. So he's building the fort out of whatever wood he can find, which is not very good. So after a couple of years, fort number 4 is rotting out badly. We get most of this information out of the governor's journals, because the Spanish government had the governor keep a journal of everything that happened. So the governor writes in his journal that the fort is in such bad shape that it could not defend if it was ever attacked. It was too flimsy. So the fort is so rotted out, they build fort number 5 a little bit further south, each time getting closer to where we are. Same wood. So after a couple of years, it's rotting out so bad that in the governor's journal he writes the fort is the only thing the fort is good for is for breeding mice. It's the only thing that we can use the fort for is to have breeding mice. So that fort rots out. They built fort number 6, a little each time getting closer to where we were. Then in the year 1586, a guy named Sir Francis Drake is heading back to England after spending over a year plundering the Spanish colonies in the Caribbean. And he's coming up front and he spots St. Augustine. He has about 2,000 soldiers with him. There's only about 150 Spanish soldiers here. So he attacks St. Augustine, burns the city, and you know what he does to the fort? He burns it down. Now fort number 6 is burnt to the ground. So they built fort number 7 even closer here. Fort number 7 is the first fort that they call San Marcos. The other forts have different names. They built fort number 7, same wood. So what do you think's happening after a couple of years with that bad wood? It's rotting out. It's rotting out so bad that in the governor's journal he writes, "We are afraid of firing a cannon inside the fort, because if we fire a cannon, the walls will probably collapse." So they built fort number 8, basically right where we are today. Fort number 8 was built here. Again, same wood. They don't have anything else. Rotting out. After a couple of years, the governor's journal is saying the fort is in such bad shape, it's so rotted out, that if we fire a cannon inside it, the walls will probably catch fire and we'll burn it down ourselves. So they built fort number 9 right about where the parking lot is in front. They built fort number 9, where today the parking lot is. Then in the year 1668, there's a pirate named Robert Searles, seizes a Spanish cargo ship, sails into the bay pretending he's a Spanish cargo ship. And at night, the pirates come out of their ship, attack St. Augustine, burn the city, and guess what they do to fort number 9? They burn it down. Now fort number 9 is burnt down. The citizens of St. Augustine start writing to King Queen of Spain, "We need a fort to protect us." Now, at the time, it was Queen Regent Mariana. And Queen Regent Mariana decides they're going to spend the equivalent of millions of dollars to build a powerful fort in St. Augustine. You're probably wondering why. Why are they going to spend all this money in a place in the middle of nowhere with only about 1,500 people, when they have big cities like Mexico City, Madrid, San Juan, Manila, where they could spend this money in other places? Why in St. Augustine, which was a small outpost in the middle of nowhere? And to understand that, you have to go back in time. You got to go back to the year 1492. And a guy named Christopher Columbus. Now, it's very well accepted that Christopher Columbus was not the first person European to make it to North America. The Vikings, there's plenty of evidence that the Vikings were here hundreds of years before Christopher Columbus. And by the way, the Incas and the Polynesians from Australia share DNA. So they were here before the Vikings. And even before them, the Clovis people came in over the Bering Straits down here tens of thousands of years before even them. So Columbus wasn't the first person to get here. What Columbus did was very important. He was the first person to get to North America and make it back. The other ones got here, they died here. They could never figure out how to get back. He figured it out. Now, Columbus was a very good navigator, and he read a lot. Now, at the time, all the gold, the riches, the silk, especially silk, came from China and India. Came by camels and horse over the silk trade. But a camel and a horse can't carry a lot compared to a ship. A ship can carry thousands of times more. But to get to India, they had to go around Africa. Spain did not have any ports in Africa. They were controlled by the Portuguese, the British, and the French. So when a Spanish treasure ship was coming back from India full of treasures, the Portuguese, French, and British were attacking them and taking the treasures. And if a ship had a problem, they had no port where they could pull into to be safe. So they were losing their treasure. They needed to find a way to get to India without having to go around Africa. Now, Columbus had never been to India. He was a very good navigator, and he read a lot. And he knew that Spain, France, England, the winds are always heading east. So you can't take a sailing ship and head west. The winds stop you. But if you go down to Africa, to the Canary Islands, the Cape Verde Islands, the winds are heading west. And he knew by reading it over by India, the winds are always heading west also. And up by Japan and China, the winds are heading east. So he figures, okay, the winds are coming off of Africa, heading west, hitting India, curving, coming up to Japan, and coming back to Europe. The winds are doing this. So if I go down to the Canary Islands, catch the winds heading west, I'll wind up in India. And then just head north until I get to around Japan, and it'll bring me back to Europe. What he didn't know is there are two big land masses in the middle, and there are actually two winds doing this. He didn't know that. So he comes down to the Canary Islands, starts heading west, going to India. Now because, remember, he had not been to India, but he had read a lot. He knew that off the east coast of India, there's a bunch of islands. We know them now as Malaysia, Indonesia, those islands, Taiwan. He knew they were there. So when he's heading west, he's expecting to hit these islands before he gets to India. So when he gets to the current modern day Bahamas, he thinks he's on the islands just offshore of India. And once he gets past these islands, he's going to be in India. But he wants to get back to tell the king and queen, I found it, I made it to India. So he takes some of the natives with him and goes back to the king and queen of Spain, says, I made it to India, and to prove it, I have brought back some Indians. And you know why we call the Native Americans here Indians? That he was completely convinced he was an Indian. He didn't know until the fourth voyage, he wasn't anywhere close to India. Now, to get back, they also found that between Florida, Cuba, and the Bahamas, there's a powerful current that heads north. Very powerful. The strongest current anywhere in the world. We know it as the Gulf Stream. So sailing ship, we get on the Gulf Stream, we get shot north very fast. Only one little problem. The Gulf Stream goes to Ireland, England, Norway, Iceland. The last place the Spanish want to take their treasure is to England. But remember how I told you that the winds come off of Africa on the Canary Cape Verde Islands? Well, modern meteorology has shown that they head west at about 5 degrees north latitude. Then they make that turn and they start heading back to Europe at about 30 degrees north latitude. St. Augustine is 29.9. So the whole idea was a Spanish ship could come down, hit the Cape Verde Islands, head west to the Caribbean, go to Cuba, go up the Gulf Stream to St. Augustine, catch the winds, and head back. We see that every year with the hurricanes. come off the African coast, Cape Verde Islands, hit the Caribbean, make a curve, and head back. Columbus figured it out without satellites. All the treasure that Spain got from the New World, to include the gold and silk from China, India, and the Philippines, crossed right in front of this fort. All on its way to Spain. That's why they decided to spend so much money here. So if a treasure ship had a problem, they could bring the treasure here, keep it safe until the next ship came by. That there were people here, great. But their big thing was to protect the treasure heading back to Spain. And they built this fort. There are dozens and dozens of other stories. We could be here for hours talking. So I will end it with this. If you have questions, feel free to ask. I will be more than happy to answer. If I know the answer, I'll give it to you. If I don't know the answer, I'll make something up, and by the time you Google it and realize it, I'll